there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very, very high above all the puerile and insipid forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. Very, very happy Wednesday. And do you know why? Well, it's a long and storied day in Wyoming political history, or an important day in Wyoming political history. See, it all started with the Pravda on the Platte. Every time they would get rid of one of their political reporters, we would all celebrate and think, maybe this time, just maybe, they'll hire somebody that would report things fairly. Now, for example, they got rid of Nick Reynolds, and we all kind of celebrated because Nick Reynolds wouldn't know a fact if it slapped him in the face. And then they got rid of him. He moved on to Newsweek or some other. Last I heard, he was working for Newsweek. And then they hired yet another leftist to report, and then it was Maya Shimizu Harris, and now I don't even think they have a politics reporter. But since that time, the cow pie has emerged, and from the very beginning, their politics reporter has been Leo Trotsky Wolfson. And I wish that I would have prepped some sad music to play, but I've been told by credible sources that Trotsky is moving on. So now,
don't let the door hit you where the good Lord splits you.
It could be, yes, indeed. We wish him well. Stay the heck out of politics, as if that's even possible. And maybe B. Wayne Hughes will hire somebody that could actually report things fairly. But good luck to you, Trotsky. We're going to miss you. Not really. We begin this morning with a piece from Breitbart. Pete Hegseth moves to axe 1/5 of 4-star general officers. Now, you got to admit, but when I first saw this article, I thought, well, there has to be some Looney Tunes that are still in the military, left over from, all the leftists we've had, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden. There's got to be some real winners that got promoted. So let's see. And I quote, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Monday instructed the military to shed 20% of its 4-star general officers as the Trump administration moves to reduce inefficiency in the military. Hegseth also called for the National Guard to remove 20% of its top officers and directed the military to cut an additional 10% of its general and flag officers, which could include 1-star generals. In earlier rounds of staff reductions, the secretary explained that the firings are a reflection, quote, a reflection of the president wanting the right people around him to execute the national security approach we want to take. In a memo announcing the cuts, Hegseth said he would remove, quote, redundant force structure to optimize and streamline leadership. He wrote that the goal is to remove the military from unnecessary bureaucratic layers. And that's been a problem with the U.S. military for a really long time. And we can go all the way back to World War II if we want, where many of the generals wanted to continue the campaign against Russia. At one point we had them where we wanted, and many of the generals said, hey, let's just finish them off and finish the job here. But the politicians said, no, No, we're not going to do that. And then if you look at Korea, Korea was yet another war managed by politicians and not seasoned military personnel. And who could forget Vietnam? Vietnam is the classic example of this, where we went into a war not to win it, but to supposedly achieve some political end, which we didn't end up, accomplishing because we didn't let the generals win the war. And in the end, we pulled out, and the communists took over the entirety of Vietnam. And such has been the case with a lot of campaigns, that we don't really enter wars to win them anymore. Look at Afghanistan. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. We spent a couple of $1 trillion. And in the end, guess who was in charge of the entire country? Though I might argue, and, Agent 29, you might disagree with me on this, but I might argue that if you enter a war to fight, in a place that has been at war for probably 1,000 years, that has been invaded multiple times, that has never been taken over, the chances of success, at least historically, were not really that good. I mean, the Russians couldn't take Afghanistan. I'm not saying the Russians are any better than our military. I'm just saying, with that country, maybe we shouldn't have gotten involved in the first place, or at the very least, we should have gone in it to win it, and we didn't do that. In the end, it's the Taliban that control it.
Yeah, anybody that has ever watched The Princess Bride knows you don't get involved in
land war in
certain
Asia.
areas. Yeah. I think the problem is that we try to make war worthwhile. We try to make it a political tool. When God talked to the children of Israel and he said, go to war, he says, kill everything. Men, women, children, all the animals, don't save anything, devastate it. And what that would do was make war so horrible that you'll do anything to avoid it, anything possible. And we've gotten away from that. We've gotten to try to make war pay, to make war useful or feasible, or quite frankly, a way to pay us.
Yeah.
And its consequences are.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is probably attributed to bureaucrats being in position of military authority, being 4-star generals. I mean, look at what was the admiral that was transitioning to become a woman, whatever. I mean, that is the classic example of how our military has been run for a really long time. The piece continues. Representative Seth Moulton, a Marine veteran who sits on the House Armed Services Committee, said he believes Hegseth is trying to politicize the military. Quote, he's creating a formal framework to fire all the generals who disagree with him and the president, said the Massachusetts Democrat. Since when has a Democrat been able to orchestrate a war and win it? I don't know if there is one.
We always say that they are, what's the term when
stupid?
No, when they're putting their own motives and blame them on you. But
projection.
After Desert Storm, it got really intense. Let's replace all of the conservatives. And they basically drummed them out of the enlisted corps. I could see no future for me. Certainly, it was not pretty. And they started getting rid of all of the conservative officers and doing exactly what they're accusing Hegseth of doing, of politicizing the military.
The other way around.
Right? Yeah. And so now they're projecting. That's the word I wanted. Now they're projecting. Well, that must be the intent of Hegseth. No, they're just trying to go back and create a military force that can win a war.
Yeah, I mean, the military has one job: to fight wars and win them. That's it.
And break stuff.
Right. I mean, but we have to get away from any sort of politicization in the military. I mean, the military's job is not to, engage in politics. It is to fight and win wars. Now, Seth Moulton was referring to a PBS, or he was talking with PBS. That's where that quotation came from. But let me continue. Quote, there are about 800 general officers in the military, but only 44 of those are 4-star general or flag officers. The Army has the largest number of general officers with 219, including 8 4-star generals. The number of general officer positions in the military is set by law. Members of Congress were not provided with the advance notification they normally would receive about the cuts, but were given a, quote, very brief alert this afternoon, according to the congressional staffer, who spoke on condition of anonymity. Of course they did. Hegseth said last week, and he called to transform the Army, calling for a leaner, more lethal force. Potential reforms include merging or closing headquarters, removing outdated vehicles and aircraft, and removing as 1,000 headquarters staff in the Pentagon. Again, you don't need bureaucracy to fight and win a war. You need a military that's more lethal and, more lethal than the other guy's military. It's like General Patton said, right? The goal is not to die for your country. It's to make some other poor bastard die for his. And that's the attitude we have to get back to. Get politics out of the military. If you're going to get involved in a war, not a land war in Asia, get in it to win it.
And if you're not in it to win it, don't go.
Exactly right. If Afghanistan should have taught everybody a big lesson about that. Well, if you want to be part of the program today, the phone number in the studio is 307-374-8989. Phone lines are open, 307-374-8989. And just to give you a little bit of heads up today on the program, we may have to cut today's program a little bit short. I still don't quite know. So don't be surprised if today's show is a little bit shorter than usual. Now, here's an interesting piece from Breitbart. I'm sure you'll appreciate this one. Cinco de Mayo events canceled for fear of ICE raids. People are very scared. They're thinking of going back to Mexico. Some cities have canceled or severely downplayed Cinco de Mayo events for fear of ICE raids and deportations. Speaking with CNN on Monday, and I've got another CNN story in the stack of stuff that it's just as stupid as this comment. Anyway, resident Hector Escobar, that should be your first clue that maybe we don't need to have this guy involved in an event. But anyway, Hector Escobar, president of Casa Puebla and Cermak Road Chamber of Commerce, said that people in his community are very scared of gathering in public, with some even considering going back to Mexico. Quote, "Our people are very scared," he said. "Honestly, they're saying they don't want to go to work. Maybe because they're here illegally. They have to go to work because they have to feed their families. If their families weren't here illegally, it wouldn't be a problem. So if they both were working, now one person is working. Yeah, whatever. You shouldn't be in the country to begin with, and you certainly shouldn't be celebrating in the middle of the street on Cinco de Mayo. Instead, go back to your home country and celebrate it there."
It just strikes me that this whole concept that we can't have a celebration, a cultural celebration, because we're afraid we'll get set back. There's a racist undertone there.
A little bit. It's intended to be racist.
Yeah. And it just
well, and you bring up a good point, Agent 29, that the whole undercurrent of this is if you are opposed to illegal aliens, and let's just be honest about what they are illegal aliens, then you are somehow racist. That if you argue that a country ought to have borders and ought to have secure borders, then you are automatically against the people who want to come in. Well, yeah, because they're not legal.
And the other side of it that I was kind of pointing toward is basically the assumption that if you get a bunch of Hispanics together, ICE is going to have a field day, because we all know that a lot of them are not legal. And I think that assumption is racist in and of itself. It's not unlike Biden saying his comments about poor people and whites.
Oh, yeah. Poor kids are... See, this is one of those cases where you got to be Johnny on the spot with the sound bites. Poor kids are just as bright and just as smart as white kids. Anyway, so I think you're exactly right that this piece, or at least, CNN is trying to paint, whomever as racist. And the implication is if you're against illegal immigration, then you're somehow against Hispanic people, which is absolutely ridiculous. There is no reason why anybody can't start the immigration process and come to this country legally. But instead, we have to have CNN argue that, well, hey, man, if you're here illegally, you must deserve to be here. It's absolutely ridiculous. When we come back, we're going to talk about more bull crap. This time about January 6th. Do that in a second. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, pretty much everywhere. It's almost like I'm omnipresent. If you miss an episode of Cowboy State Politics Live, you can always go to the live replay, which is located at the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, under the live replay button. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics Live every Tuesday through Friday at 8 a.m. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live. Now, before the break, I told you that there are a bunch of bullcrap stories in the media this morning, and here's another one. Well, the story's not bullcrap, but the what they're reporting about is. From the Federalist, J6 prosecutors bragged to Congress about locking up Americans for misdemeanors. Now, I don't know how many of you have had a run-in with the law or got a speeding ticket or maybe a parking ticket. If you're in Cheyenne at the Capitol, there's a pretty good chance if you're there every day, you're going to get at least one parking ticket simply because, you can't get out of there. There's something going on and you can't get out to move your car in time. Usually misdemeanors do not result in jail time. I'm not saying all the time. I'm saying usually. There are some like a DUI. A DUI is a misdemeanor, but you'll probably go to jail for that. But in this case, prosecutors charged hundreds and hundreds of folks from January 6th with misdemeanors, and these prosecutors are in front of Congress bragging about it.
I went to jail for having a headlight out once.
You went to jail for no headlight? How did that?
Yeah.
Who did you make angry?
The arresting officer.
Well, that's why. And I quote, "The prosecutors who dedicated themselves to getting January 6th convictions cannot fathom that they were heavy-handed and unjustly charged too many people. As President Donald Trump dismantles the deep state, angry Democrats desperately defend their January 6th Capitol riot narrative, but beam with pride that they locked up so many Americans." Mike Romano, a former federal prosecutor at the DOJ Public Integrity Section, testified last week at a hearing rehashing January 6th, saying that, quote, he is proud of the prosecutors he handled that imprisoned people present at the Capitol. Quote, "Thanks to the work of our team, the Justice Department charged more than 1,500 people with crimes and obtained criminal convictions against almost 1,300 people." All right, so stop right there. First, the federal government is almost always successful with a prosecution because they have unlimited funds. They have unlimited means. And if you're going to fight the federal government, you're probably going to have unlimited funds too, because they don't have to stop. There isn't a bank account that's stopping them from prosecuting you. So it's no wonder that they were able to get convictions on 1,300 people. The largest portion of them, however, were plea agreements that people just said, okay, fine, I'll plead guilty. I just want this to end. It's not that they took 1,300 people to court and, got convictions out of them. That's not what happened at all. Now, given the judges that were handling these cases, that is absolutely a possibility. Quote, "Sometimes prosecutors forget their job is not to see who can secure the most convictions, but to seek justice within the bounds of the law. It is scary to hear a prosecutor brag about the number of charges and convictions he had." Another disgruntled former DOJ prosecutor, Sarah Levine, sobbed bitterly in a lengthy narcissistic saga about her job, how she was hired, what she did, what it meant to her, and how she ultimately was canned. Levine didn't cry or even show concern for locking away so many breadwinners in American families for forever blemishing their work history with a federal conviction. She was proud of the work she did at the DOJ and upset that the Trump administration has erased her efforts. Quote, On January 20th of 2025, the president pardoned almost all of the defendants charged in January 6th and commuted the sentence of every other rioter. I was heartbroken. All that effort to pursue justice for the officers and the country was wiped away with a single proclamation. The narrative that January 6th was a threat to democracy or, the worst thing since the Civil War is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. And in fact, Representative Hageman was asked about this at an event on, I think it was on the 25th of April. But here's what she said. Play cut number 1.
January 6th. It's over.
It's over, is all she had to say. And that is exactly right. All these leftists and Democrats, they are still trying to perpetuate the narrative that if you were a conservative and you in any way sympathized with any of the people who were prosecuted on January 6th, then you are somehow a threat to this country. Keep in mind that those folks who were jailed because of January 6th, many of them were thrown in what is the equivalent of a gulag, solitary confinement for months on end, and in some cases, years on end. It is absolutely a travesty of justice in our country. And for prosecutors, fortunately now, former prosecutors, to claim that they did a good job simply because they threw people in jail, that's absolutely the first argument as to why they should have been fired. Any good prosecutor is not there to just seek a conviction, but to get justice. And if you were a good prosecutor, if you find out that the person that you're prosecuting didn't do it, a good prosecutor will drop the charges. But that's not what happened here. It was to pursue a conviction at any cost. And that's what they did. And they ruined like 1,300 people's lives, perhaps many more.
Too bad they weren't illegal aliens.
Yeah, too bad they won't do that to illegal aliens. That's exactly the point. Now, there are not a lot of people in Wyoming that were at January 6th. But if you talk to any of them, they'll tell you that they have very different experiences. And the truth is, the amount of people that stormed the Capitol and broke things was really a pretty small number of people. Now, I want to be very clear about this. Storming the Capitol and destroying that beautiful building, that's a crime, and you should be prosecuted for it. But protesting outside of the Capitol building, that's not a crime. That's not a crime at all. You have a right to, approach your government for a redress of grievances. Everybody has that right. And to be jailed or prosecuted just because you were there is an absolute travesty. When all of this was going on, the FBI was prosecuting people just because their cell phone pinged somewhere around Washington, D.C. on that day. Well, just because you were in the city, Washington, D.C. is about 6 square miles, at least the metro area is. Just because you were within 6 square miles does not mean that you're guilty of a crime, nor does it mean if you were at the Capitol building, you were guilty of a crime. And add on top of it that there were restricted grounds at the Capitol that day that were not marked. Many people were prosecuted just for being in those areas, and they really didn't have any idea that they were. There's a great story about the grandma who was arrested simply before being on the grounds of the Capitol on January 6th, supposedly in a restricted area. January 6th is a black mark on our history for a number of reasons. The biggest one, in my mind, is that a whole bunch of normally innocent people were prosecuted and jailed for no other reason than they were there. It is also a black mark on our history because you did have people enter the Capitol building and destroy a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, that's a crime. And those few people that are guilty of that, they should have been prosecuted, but not the 1,300 that had their lives ruined.
A few people destroyed stuff, but I remember watching the videos as it was going on, and most of the people were just calmly walking through.
Mm-hmm. The videos that came out later, which I think were broken by, I think it was Tucker Carlson that broke them first. Most of the people that were in the Capitol building, like you said, Ken, they were just walking around, and there were Capitol police officers that were leading people around the Capitol. If you go look at any of those released videos, the security videos, you can see that. Absolutely a travesty for a number of reasons, and it's on both sides in my mind. So it's been a while since we've had a moment of baseball zen. Mostly because my Texas Rangers have been sucking lately. They did win a game last night, though, beat the Red Sox, which, as I understand it, I mean, it's early in the season, but, the Red Sox got it handed to them last night.
At least they're not the Rockies.
That's true. At least they aren't 4-25 or whatever they are.
Worst record in baseball history right now.
What, do you know what it is?
I don't know. I
don't
quit
know.
following closely, but I have seen several headlines saying they've charted. They're in uncharted territory.
I used to be a Rockies fan, and then they traded away Nolan Arenado, and I mean, they weren't really all that good, but you trade away the one guy who actually has some talent on your team. Though, I have to tell you, Ken, when the lovely Christine and I went to Denver last summer to watch the Rangers, the Rockies swept the Rangers, which, I mean, last year wasn't saying a whole heck of a lot. But anyway, so do you remember Keith Hernandez? I mean, he's a famous New York Met superstar, though he's one of the baseball greats who is not in the Hall of Fame. He never did get enough support to win a ballot. But now, in my mind, he is trying to manufacture a LGBTQ type controversy scandal out of nothing. This is from The Blaze. MLB legend Keith Hernandez refuses not to use the term drag bunt. I know we're not supposed to say that. I know this whole piece is pretty bizarre, but I'm going to explain it here in just a second. Hernandez said the term has changed, but did not mention what a drag bunt is now called. Two-time World Series winner Keith Hernandez raised eyebrows by alleging that it is politically incorrect to use the term drag bunt during a broadcast. The New York Mets broadcaster and former player was commenting on a game between the Mets and the St. Louis Cardinals on Sunday, the second game of a doubleheader, which the Cardinals won 5-4. Following a bunt play by Cardinals outfielder Victor Scott II, Hernandez surprised fans by saying the term drag bunt is not supposed to be used. Quote, and this is a perfect bunt. This is shades of Bud Harrelson, who was terrific. I know you're not supposed to say it, but they call it a different term. But in our day, it was a drag bunt and nothing you can do. You did everything right. It was perfect. All right. So first, we have to figure out exactly what a drag bunt is. So go ahead and throw this up on the screen, Ken. All right. So there's the bunt.
Good bunt. With
right up to third baseline. Okay. There's another one.
Oh, look at this.
Okay. That's a perfect drag bunt. Here's another one. See? Okay. All right, good enough. So the drag bunt is actually when you have your feet at the front of the batter's box and you bunt with the bat, and it kind of looks like you're slashing at the ball. You're really not, but that's what it looks like. And when you take off running, it looks like you're dragging the ball kind of behind you. But I mean, it only happens just a second because the ball is supposed to go up the third baseline. So what Keith Hernandez is trying to do, I think, is and it's weird. This whole article is strange, but I think that he's trying to combat a controversy that doesn't exist, and in effect is trying to create one in baseball. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous.
DRAGBUNT, drag bunt.
Drag bunt. But by the way, I mean, if you're a baseball fan, you've got to be a fan of the bunt. I mean, that is a great play. And, I was never any good at it. In fact, I really wasn't a good hitter anyway. I hit one home run, and it wasn't even over the fence. It went over the outfielder's head, and he fumbled it, so it was kind of an error. But anyway, I mean, that's your moment of baseball.
Yeah, I played in a softball league, and the first time I hit one about as hard as I could, and they said, "There's no bunting in softball."
Exactly right. The truth is, my friends, that in all of these cases where it's just stupid language and you're trying to manufacture a controversy out of it, it's just idiotic, and we've got to get past the place where we think that language creates some sort of discrimination. It's all stupid, and we should just all get past it. Let's go ahead and take our last break. Like I said, we're gonna have to cut the program short a little bit. I've got something I got to do this morning. So when we come back, we'll do about another, I don't know, 10 or so minutes, and then we'll finish up the program.
Here at U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Some say standing up for what you believe in is being extreme. Ask any woman in Wyoming. They'll tell you this is called courage. The mainstream media claims that holding the line on important issues is being unreasonable. My mom taught me this is called staying true to our principles. In other places, people argue you always have to compromise to get something done. Here in Wyoming, we know that some things are worth protecting at all costs. Some say it's time we give up on the values that made our state great to accommodate toxic culture. I say it's time to stand tall and protect the values that have served Wyoming well for over 134 years. Join Honor Wyoming as we defend and preserve the Wyoming way of life. Find out how you can make a difference today.
Visit honorwyoming.org. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics. I'm David Iverson. On today's short program, total shock, completely weird. Nobody would have ever seen this coming, but American manufacturing orders are up. I can't imagine how that could possibly happen. You know, Trump's destroying the economy, except, of course, if you make things here. From the Daily Wire. American manufacturers are seeing a surge in demand as President Donald Trump's tariffs force companies to reconsider doing business in China. Trump's tariffs, including a 145% levy on Chinese goods, are causing American-made products to be more competitive in the market. As a result, many small and medium manufacturers are experiencing a surge in demand and are prepping to ramp up production to hire new workers. For example, Juergens Incorporated, a Midwestern toolmaker with less than 500 employees, says it's, quote, going like gangbusters trying to keep up with demand, the Wall Street Journal reported. They are seeing an influx of orders from customers trying to avoid import tariffs, along with steady defense-related demand. Quote, we're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, said Juergens president Jack Schron, according to the Journal. We're swamped. Grand River Rubber and Plastics, a plastic rubber manufacturer in Ohio, says customers that once offshored to China are reversing course, the Journal noted. Two buyers who left years ago returned within days of each other to two new oil filter manufacturers, and they've already placed orders. The company's new business could amount to $5 million annually. Roughly 10% of Grand River's revenue. The spike in new business, reported by many American manufacturers, coincides with a sharp decrease in Chinese manufacturing. When Trump announced the tariffs last month, he predicted that American businesses and consumers would both benefit. And I quote, jobs and factories will come roaring back into the country, and you'll see it happening already. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We'll pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. And ultimately, more production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices for consumers. This just makes sense. If you are forced to buy American goods because it's too expensive to buy goods from other countries, obviously American manufacturing will go. I don't understand why so many people are completely opposed to all these tariffs. I mean, even here in Sheridan, I went down and talked to the protesters at the last protest. It's like every other week now. But all of them that I talked to had no understanding of what tariffs are actually for.
There was a website put up by the White House, I think last week. I might have sent you a link to it.
Yeah.
And it just showed all of the investments being made in American manufacturing. It was staggering.
It's a staggering number. And part of this goes back to, and we spoke about Clinton earlier when we were talking about the military, but making or giving China most favored nation status, that really was the beginning of the end. I shouldn't say the end, but the beginning of the decline for American manufacturing, because a lot of companies moved overseas because they could manufacture stuff cheaper there. Nike, though I think that their business practices are kind of despicable. Yeah, the Uyghur slaves evidently work pretty cheap, but that's exactly what they did. You know, it used to be that, and I'm sure their prices are still the same, but it used to be, at least when I was growing up, that Nikes were the best tennis shoes that you could possibly get, and and they were all made overseas. Well, there's no reason for that. America has the manufacturing capabilities to do pretty much anything we want. For a really long time, we led the world in the manufacturing of electronics. I mean, it was a big joke, right? Where'd you get that? China. Oh, it's going to fall apart. And that's exactly what happened, because we didn't make anything. I don't know, last week or the week before, I told you the meaning of the term Rust Belt. And that is where that came from, is a whole bunch of factories that were abandoned because business was moved overseas. And then these buildings were just left there to rot and rust. And that's why you have the term the Rust Belt. Well, anyway, my friends, we burned up a very short episode on today's program. Make sure that you stay tuned to Cowboy State Politics. The podcast will be released a little bit later this morning. I'm thinking about 11. I'm going to do a deep dive into what happened in Cody, the GOP elections. Probably do a little bit of discussion about Wyoming. There's a controversy that some people are trying to manufacture out of that it just doesn't make any sense. So we'll do that on the podcast. Other than that, my friends, we'll see you tomorrow on the broadcast. Another episode of Cowboy State Politics Live. See you tomorrow. I'm David Iverson.